Nobody saw it coming. For months, the conversation felt settled. Scouts debated arm strength, analysts broke down footwork, and draft boards quietly placed one name near the top, Shedeur Sanders. Some had him as QB1. Others labeled him a late first-round lock. A few even whispered top 5 upside. And then draft night happened, and everything flipped in an instant. 5th round. That single number hit like a shockwave. Suddenly, the same player who had been dissected as a franchise cornerstone was being treated like a developmental gamble. Social media turned ruthless. Pundits backtracked. Fans started asking if teams had discovered something. But here's the question nobody answered clearly. What actually changed? Because the film didn't disappear overnight. The arm talent was still there. The accuracy didn't evaporate. The toughness didn't fade. His production didn't magically rewrite itself. Yet the moment that draft slot appeared on screen, perception shifted. And in today's league, perception moves faster than truth. What makes this even more explosive is that not everyone changed their evaluation. Some respected analysts doubled down, insisting their grading never moved. In fact, one major outlet maintained that Sanders would still be ranked at the top of this quarterback class based purely on tape. Not draft position, not narrative. Tape. That kind of consistency raises uncomfortable questions. If the internal grades stayed high, why did the public confidence collapse? Was it pre-draft whispers, reports of concerns that were never fully explained, rumors suggesting teams were hesitant for reasons that had nothing to do with throws between the numbers? It's been said that behind-the-scenes conversations shaped the slide, but no verified football regression was ever clearly identified. No catastrophic injury, no shocking performance drop, just a steady drumbeat of uncertainty that grew louder as April approached. And that's where things get interesting. Because once a player falls, the story rewrites itself automatically. The same traits that once screamed elite upside suddenly become limitations. Confidence becomes arrogance. Poise becomes calculated. The draft slot becomes proof, even if the evaluation didn't change. That's the paradox of draft night. It doesn't just reveal decisions, it reshapes reputations. So here we are, months removed, staring at one unavoidable reality. The tape says one thing, the draft position says another, and the league seems caught in between. Was this a simple miscalculation? A narrative snowball that went too far? Or did teams overthink a quarterback who had already proven he could carry chaos on his shoulders? If you love real talk and fearless NFL breakdowns, hit subscribe and join Coach Speaks. Because when you dig deeper into what happened before and after that 5th round announcement, the timeline starts to feel less like a football decision and more like a perception shift that spiraled out of control. And that's where this story really begins. Long before the draft cameras started flashing, the evaluation felt almost unanimous. Shedeur Sanders wasn't some late riser or surprise name climbing boards in March. He had been in the conversation for over a year. Scouts tracked him closely throughout 2024. Analysts debated his ceiling. Executives quietly studied his tape. And through all of it, one thing stayed consistent: he was viewed as one of the top quarterbacks in the class. Mock drafts from multiple outlets projected him as a late first-rounder. Some placed him firmly in the 2nd round with starter upside. A few bold projections even pushed him into top 5 territory heading into early 2025 discussions. That kind of momentum doesn't build by accident. It comes from traits that translate: timing, anticipation, ball placement, composure under pressure. And here's what makes this important. The film didn't suddenly collapse. There wasn't a stretch of disastrous performances that tanked his grade. No late-season meltdown that forced evaluators to reconsider everything. His mechanics didn't unravel. His arm didn't weaken. His production didn't crater. If anything, he showed flashes of carrying an unstable offense through pure resilience. Yet somewhere between the end of the season and draft night, the tone began to shift. It wasn't loud at first. It was subtle. Reports started surfacing that some teams had concerns. Anonymous sources hinted at intangibles or fit. No specifics. No confirmed red flags, just carefully worded uncertainty. And in the pre-draft cycle, uncertainty spreads fast. Rumors suggested interviews may not have gone perfectly. Others speculated teams were overanalyzing personality traits. But nothing concrete ever surfaced. No verified incident, no confirmed locker room issue, no public evidence that justified a dramatic drop in projection. It became a swirl of whispers without a smoking gun. Meanwhile, the measurable traits stayed the same. His accuracy on intermediate throws still stood out. His ability to absorb hits and deliver under pressure was still on tape. His toughness wasn't theoretical, it was documented. And despite operating behind inconsistent protection, he continued to produce at a high level. Evaluators had already factored in the chaos around him when giving those early grades. That context didn't suddenly disappear. This is what makes the pre-draft hype impossible to erase. Because hype built on marketing fades, but hype built on months of scouting reports, private workouts, and internal grading doesn't just evaporate unless something drastic changes. And nothing drastic ever clearly did. That's why the draft slide felt so jarring. It didn't align with the previous 12 months of evaluation. It contradicted the steady drumbeat of confidence that had followed him since early projections labeled him one of the safest quarterback prospects in the class. So when people now act surprised at analysts maintaining a high grade, it misses the bigger picture. That grade wasn't invented after the draft. It was there all along. The real question isn't why some still believe in him. The real question is what convinced so many others to suddenly pretend they never did. Draft night didn't just change a number next to his name, it changed the way people talked about him. And that shift happened almost instantly. When Shedeur Sanders slipped out of the early rounds, something strange took over the conversation. The analysis stopped sounding like film breakdown and started sounding like justification. Before the slide, the discussion centered on timing routes, pocket toughness, anticipation. After the slide, the tone pivoted to concerns. Vague ones, undefined ones. Suddenly, words like ceiling and limitations dominated the narrative. The same traits that once made him intriguing were reframed as flaws. And that's the power of draft position. When a quarterback is selected early, analysts search for reasons he'll succeed. When he falls, people search for reasons he deserved to. It becomes less about what's on tape and more about defending the outcome. Because admitting a collective miscalculation, that's uncomfortable. Part of the noise centered around the pre-draft process. He didn't throw at certain events. He skipped specific workouts. That became headline material. But here what gets overlooked. Top quarterback prospects skip throwing sessions all the time. It's strategic. It's advised. It's normal, yet in this case it was framed as avoidance. Reports claimed teams were frustrated. Others suggested it hurt his stock. But those claims were never backed by hard evidence. No confirmed team came forward publicly to say his performance in interviews or workouts drastically altered their grade. Instead, it became a growing cloud of speculation, and speculation fills gaps quickly. Then came the combine chatter. Body language was analyzed. Facial expressions were dissected. Even the way he carried himself became a talking point. That's when you know the narrative has moved beyond football. When frame-by-frame personality breakdowns replace coverage breakdowns, something has shifted. It's been said that once a few teams hesitated, others followed. That's how draft rooms work. Momentum builds both ways. Confidence can be contagious, but so can doubt. And once the slide began, the optics alone were enough to amplify it. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Nothing on film changed between January and April. The arm strength didn't weaken. The processing speed didn't slow down. The tape didn't rewrite itself. What changed was perception. And perception spreads faster than context. The most fascinating part? Some evaluators never moved off their original grade. They maintained that the player they studied for months was still the same quarterback, regardless of draft slot. That consistency stands in sharp contrast to how quickly public opinion flipped. And that's where the tension really lives. Because when narrative replaces film, decisions start to feel reactionary instead of analytical. Draft boards become shaped by momentum rather than mechanics. And once that happens, the truth gets buried under noise. But the story doesn't stop there. Because when you zoom out from draft night and actually examine the situation he stepped into, the conversation becomes even more complicated. The part nobody wants to say out loud is this: context changes everything. And when Shedeur Sanders finally stepped into a starting role, the situation around him wasn't exactly stable. In fact, some analysts bluntly described it as looking like an NFL Europe roster. That wasn't meant as disrespect, it was frustration. Because week after week, the offensive line looked different. Protection broke down fast. Pocket depth collapsed almost instantly. There were stretches where pressure arrived before routes even developed. And when a quarterback is forced to speed up his internal clock on nearly every snap, the entire evaluation shifts. Timing looks rushed. Reads look hurried. Decisions look panicked. But the root cause isn't always the quarterback. Sometimes it's survival. There were games where the run game disappeared completely. Defenses didn't respect play action because there was nothing to respect. That meant safeties sat deeper in coverage. Windows tightened. Every throw required precision. And even then, receivers struggled to create separation. Contested catches became the norm instead of the exception. At one point, there were stretches where Sanders was effectively carrying the offense in ways that don't show up in clean stat sheets. Escaping free rushers, extending broken plays, absorbing hits just to deliver the ball. When a non-running quarterback ends up leading the team in rushing yards for portions of the season, that's not a feature. That's a red flag about the environment. Yet instead of focusing on the instability around him, much of the criticism centered directly on him. Other young quarterbacks in the league have received patience when operating in chaos. Analysts cite rebuilding years. They point to weak supporting casts. They call it development time. But in this case, the tone often shifted toward blame, as if one player was supposed to mask structural issues instantly. And that's where the NFL Europe roster comparison hits hardest. It wasn't saying his teammates lacked talent permanently. It was highlighting the revolving door effect: injuries, inconsistency, constant lineup changes. Chemistry never had time to settle. Protection calls changed weekly. Continuity, one of the most underrated factors for quarterback growth, never fully formed. Despite that, the flashes were there. There were drives where the offense moved efficiently, moments where anticipation and accuracy sliced through coverage, throws made while absorbing contact that showed legitimate toughness. The tape wasn't flawless, no young quarterback's tape is, but it showed resilience. It showed processing under duress. And here's the critical part. When evaluators factor in environment, performance under pressure often carries more weight than clean pocket production. Surviving chaos matters. Competing through instability matters. If you love real talk and fearless NFL breakdowns, hit subscribe and join Coach Speaks. So when people reduce the entire conversation to draft slot or win-loss record, it ignores the layers. Football isn't played in a vacuum. Quarterbacks don't operate alone. And when you compare his production to others who had steadier protection and more balanced support, that's when the debate becomes even more uncomfortable. Now the conversation shifts to the comparison that keeps fueling debate: Fernando Mendoza versus Shedeur Sanders. And this is where things get uncomfortable, because when you strip away draft position and online momentum, the numbers demand a closer look. First, this isn't about tearing Mendoza down. He can play. He's athletic, flashes creativity, and has shown the ability to extend drives when protection breaks down. There's real upside there. Some analysts have even compared his style to a more mobile version of Jared Goff, someone who can operate efficiently when structure is clean and rhythm is established. But here, where context matters, Mendoza operated behind steadier protection for long stretches. The offensive line continuity was stronger. The system around him offered more balance. The run game commanded attention. That changes defensive behavior. That changes coverage shells. That changes how often a quarterback is forced into third-and-long survival mode. Now compare that to Sanders' environment, rotating linemen, inconsistent run support, frequent pressure. Yet statistically, Sanders' production either matched or exceeded Mendoza's in key categories: completion percentage, touchdown-to-interception ratio, total yardage output, efficiency in high-pressure situations. Stats don't tell the entire story, but they also don't lie. When one quarterback produces comparable, or stronger, numbers with less structural stability, evaluators notice. That's not hype. That's context-adjusted performance. And that's why some analysts maintain their grading consistency even after draft night. It's been said online that Mendoza's stock rose because of system polish and late-cycle momentum. Reports claim teams fell in love with his pro-day command and playoff exposure. That may be true. Extra games mean extra tape. Extra tape means more evaluation opportunities. But opportunity isn't the same thing as superiority. Meanwhile, Sanders' narrative shifted in the opposite direction. Skipped workouts were amplified. Interview rumors circulated. Draft momentum cooled. But none of those factors directly rewrote his on-field production. The gap isn't about athleticism alone. Mendoza may have a slight edge in mobility, but quarterback evaluation isn't a track meet. It's anticipation, ball placement, decision speed, and the ability to deliver when the pocket collapses. And when you watch both tapes side by side, Sanders' ability to absorb chaos and still execute stands out. The debate, then, is who has talent. Both do. The real question is, who has shown they can elevate above instability? Who has proven they can maintain production when the support system cracks? Because when the numbers are placed next to the context, the comparison becomes sharper. Draft round suggests one story. Film and output suggest another. And that contradiction, between perception and measurable production, is exactly why this conversation refuses to fade. Here, where the conversation turns from football to something deeper. Because once you step back and look at how Shedeur Sanders was treated throughout the draft process, the inconsistencies become impossible to ignore. Start with the combine narrative. He chose not to throw in certain settings. That decision was analyzed like it was a scandal. Debates exploded across networks. Questions were raised about competitiveness, confidence, even leadership. Yet history shows that top quarterback prospects skip throwing sessions all the time. It's strategic. It protects draft stock. It limits unnecessary risk. When others have done it, it barely caused a ripple. But here, it became a storyline. Then came the Shrine Bowl discussion. Reports indicated he was advised not to participate in certain activities. Multiple insiders suggested that decision wasn't random. It was calculated and mutually understood. Still, criticism followed. The assumption quickly became that avoiding workouts meant avoiding evaluation. That leap was never fully backed by verified evidence. And that's where the double standard debate really gains traction. Because at the same time, other quarterbacks entered the draft cycle with far less scrutiny. Some skipped drills entirely. Some limited media access. Some leaned heavily on controlled pro-day environments. Yet the tone around them remained calm, even protective. Analysts focused on upside. They emphasized development. They highlighted growth potential. With Sanders, the lens felt harsher. Body language was dissected. Confidence was reframed as ego. Composure was questioned. Anonymous reports surfaced suggesting teams had concerns, but specifics rarely followed. No confirmed disciplinary issue. No documented locker room fracture. Just a steady stream of vague commentary that shaped perception without concrete proof. It's been said that once enough whispers circulate, they begin to sound like facts. And that may be what happened here. In the absence of clear evidence, narrative filled the space. Meanwhile, when Fernando Mendoza skipped certain timed elements or operated in controlled evaluation settings, it was framed as smart strategy, preparation, professionalism. The tone difference was noticeable. Now, none of this proves bias. It doesn't confirm unfair intent, but it does highlight how differently similar actions were interpreted. And perception matters, especially in draft rooms where momentum can swing based on public and internal pressure. The broader issue isn't about one skipped workout. It's about consistency. If evaluation standards shift depending on the name attached to the jersey, that's a problem. If leadership traits are praised in one prospect and criticized in another for similar behavior, that deserves examination. Because once draft position enters the picture, the narrative tends to justify itself. The fall becomes validation. The skepticism becomes retroactive reasoning. But when you trace the timeline closely, the tone around Sanders shifted long before the selection was announced. And that raises a question that still hasn't been answered clearly. Was the criticism driven by football or by something else entirely? While the national debate rages on, the real storm is happening inside the building and around the coverage of the Cleveland Browns. Because instead of clarity, the quarterback situation has turned into a carousel that never seems to stop spinning. At one point, the room included veterans, reclamation projects, developmental prospects, all competing for oxygen. Names like Joe Flacco brought experience. Kenny Pickett represented a younger reset. Then came draft chatter about adding yet another option: developmental arms, high-upside projects, even injured prospects floated as long-term insurance. And that's where the chaos starts to feel self-inflicted. Because every time a new quarterback rumor surfaces, it sends a message, intentional or not, that the team isn't fully committed to the guy already in the room. Instead of building around stability, the conversation keeps drifting toward experimentation. More competition, more evaluation, more uncertainty. Local media hasn't exactly calmed the waters either. Certain outlets continue recycling debates that feel disconnected from the bigger picture. The focus swings wildly from one name to the next. One week it's speculation about bringing in a developmental prospect recovering from injury. The next week, it's buzz about a late-round flyer who flashed in limited reps. Meanwhile, pressing needs along the offensive line and defensive interior receive less urgency in the conversation. It creates a cycle. Doubt fuels coverage, coverage fuels doubt. Quarterback development requires structure. It requires continuity in protection schemes, receiving core chemistry, and coaching philosophy. When the narrative constantly suggests replacement instead of reinforcement, it complicates that growth. There's also the resource factor. Draft capital, salary cap allocation, repetition in practice, reps in preseason. Every additional quarterback experiment siphons attention from other roster areas. Interior line depth suffers. Defensive rotation consistency weakens. The long-term blueprint becomes cloudy. This isn't about dismissing competition. Competition is healthy, but endless uncertainty is. The bigger concern is that constant quarterback turnover can create instability that no prospect, no matter how talented, can overcome. History across the league shows that even gifted quarterbacks struggle when franchises fail to provide continuity. So the question becomes sharper. Are the Browns evaluating carefully or overthinking aggressively? If you love real talk and fearless NFL breakdowns, hit subscribe and join Coach Speaks. Because if the answer is already in the building, if the traits, toughness, and tape point toward long-term viability, then doubling down on support might be smarter than doubling down on doubt. And if they continue chasing the next name instead of developing the current one, the cycle may never end. Which leads to the bigger question looming over all of this. Is the league and the organization willing to admit when it already has the quarterback it needs? Step back from the names, step back from the headlines, look at the pattern. Because when a prospect like Shedeur Sanders goes from projected franchise cornerstone to fifth-round selection without a clear football collapse, it forces a bigger question. Was this evaluation, or was it overcorrection? NFL front offices operate in pressure chambers. One missed quarterback pick can set a franchise back 5 years. General managers lose jobs over it. Coaches get fired over it. Entire scouting departments get reshuffled because of it. So when uncertainty creeps in, even slightly, hesitation spreads fast. And once hesitation starts, nobody wants to be the outlier. If one team quietly moves a quarterback down their board based on rumored concerns, and another hears about it, doubt multiplies. Draft rooms are competitive, but they're also interconnected. Information circulates, momentum builds, and sometimes groupthink takes over. It's been said that teams didn't want the spotlight that would come with drafting Sanders early. The expectations, the scrutiny, the constant media attention. That kind of spotlight can amplify pressure inside an organization. Now, to be clear, there's no confirmed evidence that this drove decisions, but the speculation exists. And in high-stakes environments, perception often influences behavior. There's also the human factor. Admitting you were wrong about a player is difficult, but admitting you were wrong after passing on him, that's even harder. So once the slide began, sticking to the new narrative became easier than revering course. The fall itself became justification. Draft position can create its own gravity. When a player drops, the assumption becomes, there must be something we're not seeing, even if the tape says otherwise, even if months of evaluation pointed higher. The psychological safety of consensus often outweighs the risk of standing alone. History shows how unpredictable quarterback evaluation can be. Some top picks become cautionary tales. Some late-round selections rewrite record books. The draft has never been an exact science, its projection layered with probability and pressure. So the bigger picture isn't just about one quarterback. It's about whether the league sometimes reacts to noise instead of trusting the full body of work. It's about whether narratives, fueled by anonymous reports and draft momentum, can snowball into decisions that don't fully align with film. Because if Sanders develops into what early projections suggested, the conversation won't just be about one draft night. It will be about how quickly the evaluation system shifted and why. And that's the part nobody wants to confront. Was this a calculated football decision? Or was it a moment where doubt became louder than evidence? At some point, the noise fades, draft grades stop updating, headlines move on, and all that's left is the truth, what happens on the field. That's where this story will ultimately be decided for Shedeur Sanders, not in mock drafts, not in anonymous quotes, not in the round number attached to his name. Because here's the reality the league rarely admits out loud. Draft position is a prediction, not a verdict. History has proven that over and over again. The board gets things right sometimes. Other times, it misses in spectacular fashion. Careers are never defined by where a name is called. They're defined by what happens after the lights turn off and the excuses disappear. What makes this situation different is how sharply the narrative shifted without a clear football explanation. The talent didn't vanish. The tape didn't crumble. The production didn't suddenly become meaningless. What changed was perception. And once perception locks in, it's incredibly difficult to reverse, especially for institutions that pride themselves on certainty. That's why the admission may never come. If Sanders succeeds, there won't be press conferences admitting overcorrection. There won't be headlines revisiting draft night decisions. The conversation will quietly shift to development, fit, opportunity. The past will be reframed, not revisited. And if he struggles, the draft slot will be cited as proof that the system got it right all along, even if the evaluation process itself was flawed. That's how narratives protect themselves. But the most revealing part of this entire debate isn't whether he becomes a star. It's how uncomfortable people became defending their original evaluations once momentum turned. How quickly confidence dissolved. How fast film took a back seat to optics. That tension exposed something deeper about how the league processes risk, pressure, and public scrutiny. This was never just about one quarterback. It was about how easily collective doubt can override months of work, how whispers can outweigh evidence, how safer decisions sometimes feel smarter than correct ones. And that's why this story still matters. Because if Sanders proves the early evaluations right, it won't just validate his talent. It will challenge the idea that consensus always equals truth. It will force people to confront whether they trusted the tape or followed the room. The league may never openly admit it, But the receipts will exist on Sundays, in box scores, in film rooms, and in wins. And when that happens, the question won't be whether he belonged. The question will be who was brave enough to say it first, and who chose to stay quiet instead. I prefer this response.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.